I think my trauma was trying to come up for a very long time, but in this particular experience, it's like it was going to come out no matter what. So I was in this bodywork session, and bodywork had typically been something for me that was down-regulating and it was calming and it was taking the edge of my distress and my pain and discomfort. But in this particular session, the therapist, who was not trauma-informed, went a little bit too much into my fascia, and he later told me that he could sense emotion there. He didn't know what it was, but he could sense emotion, so he decided to go into it. And what happened was, the moment that the trauma was connected to and there was some pressure into my fascia, I somatized, so I associated to the body. When I'd been living outside my body my whole life as a survival mechanism not to deal with the trauma, and so the moment I somatized or associated, I started to regress back to the time. And this particular first regression experience was one when I was being severely physically harmed. And so that was happening in a room with a man that I barely knew, with his fingers in my stomach, and I was remembering this really awful experience of abuse, and I freaked out. So I just kind of braced and held it. And then when the session was over, I walked onto the street. It was evening, I can remember it pretty vividly, and I just started crying and crying, and it was like a movie in my head of all these experiences where I'd been physically harmed. And I didn't know what to do with it for about 2 weeks. I was just crying and purging and purging. Then there was a pause, and in that pause, there was a little voice that said to me, "This is what you have to do, Natalia. This is the root of it all. You need to find all of these things." That was a small piece, and let it come out. So I went into this process that was intuitive yet intentional. So each day I would tune in to my body, and I had no concept of somatics or trauma healing at that time. I just knew that this needed to happen. So I would tune into my body, find the area, feel the sensations, and link into the emotions and the past experiences. And at that time, nothing about it was trauma informed, nothing about it was safe. And I would have these huge eruptions of tears and wailing and shaking and moving. And actually it became so heightened that I started to have symptoms of healing crisis in the body. So I had my eyes swelling up and rashes appearing on me and bigger pains emerging. So everything was coming up, I guess, to release. And sometimes the activation was so high that I was terrified, but I just knew that it needed to happen. And after about 4 months of processing, my symptoms went away and I was better, at least physically. I was terrified. There were points where my heart rate became so high that I literally thought I was going to have a heart attack and die. But there was this piece of me that was telling me, "You are safe, you are going to be okay." And that piece of me had never been there before. So there was a conscious, very grown up and calm part of myself that had emerged to look after me, while all these terrified and distressed childhood and young adult parts of me took their turn to tell their story. So yeah, I was really scared. I think that I've gone through a lot of trauma, and that unfortunately when I was younger and right through my young adulthood, no one knew what to do with that. So I got sicker and sicker because the trauma was ignored, and because it was masked and treated with medications and treatments that just made my sense of threat worse. So I think my entire sickness was a function of trauma and really the wrong kind of care. And that the moment I could start creating experiences of safety for my body and start processing my trauma, there was a pathway to healing. I don't think it's a miracle at all.